Ethan Rowden and Nadira Halim seemed like the perfect couple, an American husband and his Malaysian wife living a quiet suburban dream, until Nadira uncovered the one secret Ethan could never allow her to reveal, a discovery that would turn their marriage into a chilling true crime nightmare. Ethan Rowden and Nadira Halim were a couple who at first glance looked like the embodiment of a perfect marriage. When neighbors saw them walking together on the quiet suburban streets, they often remarked how well-suited they looked. Ethan, tall and sharply dressed, carried himself with the kind of confidence that made people believe he had his life under control. Nadira, originally from Malaysia, had a warmth that drew people to her. She was gracious in her interactions, always smiling, and had quickly adapted to her new life in the United States. Together, they seemed untouchable, an image of love and stability that others quietly envied. What no one saw was the carefully hidden cracks running deep beneath the polished exterior. Nadira had left everything behind to start her life with Ethan. Her family back in Malaysia had been hesitant, but Ethan had won their trust with his charm and promises of a secure future for their daughter. In the early months, Nadira believed those promises. Their home was elegant but modest, a two-story house with a small garden that she filled with orchids, a flower that reminded her of home. Ethan's career in finance provided well for them, and Nadira spent her days volunteering at the local community center, building connections in a place that was once unfamiliar to her. From the outside, there was no sign of trouble, but Nadira was observant. She had noticed how Ethan sometimes disappeared for hours without explanation. He often brushed off her gentle questions, giving vague answers that did little to settle her unease. There were late-night phone calls he took in hushed tones, always stepping outside or locking himself in his office. His briefcase, which he carried everywhere, was never left unattended, and the drawers in his study were locked with small but sturdy mechanisms. For months she told herself it was work pressure, that the finance world demanded secrecy and long hours. She tried to bury her suspicions because she wanted to believe in the man she had chosen, yet the more she ignored her instincts, the louder they became. Little inconsistencies started stacking up. Receipts for trips Ethan never mentioned. Withdrawals from bank accounts she didn't know existed. The occasional appearance of bruises on his hands, explained away as accidents or gym injuries. The man who once made her feel safe began to feel like a stranger sharing her home. She couldn't shake the sense that something was fundamentally wrong, that beneath the charming husband was a version of Ethan she had never met. Nadira's discomfort grew in silence. She didn't confide in many people, but her closest friend, Marissa Quaid, noticed the shift. Nadira's once bright smile was often forced, her laughter shorter, her gaze drifting when she thought no one was watching. Marissa asked gently if everything was fine, but Nadira only offered vague reassurances. Deep down, she feared what the truth might be if she dug too deep. At night, when Ethan was asleep, she sometimes lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every moment that didn't add up, every sign she had ignored in her eagerness to build a happy life. The unease began to manifest in physical ways. She became restless, more easily startled, and hyper-aware of Ethan's routines. She knew which days he left early, which nights he came home late, and how long he lingered in his study. She memorized the sound of the key turning in the lock of his drawers, a sharp metallic click that seemed to echo louder with each passing week. Slowly, the suspicion that had started as a faint whisper in her mind grew into something she could no longer silence. For Ethan, the facade was everything. He carried himself with the same effortless charm in public, never allowing a crack in his performance. He shook hands confidently at neighborhood gatherings, asked about people's children, and told stories about his supposedly busy work schedule. If anyone asked Nadira about their life, she responded with the kind of gentle optimism that made others believe they were the model couple. But behind closed doors, she saw glimpses of a man who guarded his privacy with an intensity that frightened her. His temper was subtle, more a flash in his eyes than an outburst, but enough to remind her that she was treading carefully. The perfect marriage everyone admired was nothing more than a shell. Nadira felt trapped between the image of the life she wanted to believe in and the growing certainty that her husband was hiding something dangerous. She didn't yet know the depth of his secrets or the risks of uncovering them, but she was already standing on the edge of a storm she couldn't control. What began as curiosity was evolving into a determination that would soon place her in greater danger than she had ever imagined. Nadira's curiosity, once a quiet hum in the back of her mind, began to take control of her every action. She could no longer ignore the locked drawers, the mysterious phone calls, and the nagging feeling that her husband was living a life she knew nothing about. Each day the questions grew louder. Who was Ethan Rowden really? What was hidden behind the doors of his private study? What was he so desperate to keep from her? The trust she once had in him was unraveling, thread by thread, until it became impossible to hold on. It was a Saturday afternoon when Nadira first gathered the courage to step into Ethan's office while he was away. The room had always carried a weight about it, neat to the point of sterility, as though he had staged it for appearance. The bookshelves were lined with carefully arranged volumes, but few bore signs of being read. A large mahogany desk sat in the center, its surface immaculate, but the locked drawers beneath it whispered of secrets begging to be revealed. Nadira's hands trembled as she tried the handle, knowing it would not give. Her eyes wandered to his briefcase propped against the chair, a familiar accessory that Ethan never let out of his sight. For once he had left it behind. Nadira hesitated, then reached for it. The latches snapped open, and inside she found neatly stacked folders. She flipped through the first set of documents, expecting perhaps financial records or work files. Instead, what she saw left her cold. Bank statements from offshore accounts under names she didn't recognize, large sums of money moved across borders without explanation, and contracts written in coded language that spoke of activities far from legal. She pressed her hand to her mouth, her pulse raced. These weren't the papers of an ordinary finance worker. Deeper in the briefcase, she found photographs. Some were of Ethan with men she had never met, standing beside luxury cars in unfamiliar locations. Others were more disturbing, images of individuals she didn't know, faces blurred or circled with red ink. One photograph in particular froze her in place. Ethan, standing beside Grant Willard, a name she had never heard, shaking hands as if sealing an agreement. The background looked foreign, perhaps somewhere in Southeast Asia. Alongside the photographs were documents suggesting fraud schemes and connections to criminal networks. Nadira's mind swirled with dread as she realized this wasn't just about hidden money. Ethan had a past entangled with danger. She placed everything back exactly as she had found it, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the papers. The realization struck her like a physical blow. She was living with a man who wasn't who he claimed to be. The charming, successful husband that everyone admired was a facade. Behind the smiles and polite gestures was someone capable of far darker actions. She felt trapped, caged in a home that now seemed hostile and suffocating. Over the next few days, Nadira's demeanor changed. She became quieter, watching Ethan more carefully, taking note of his expressions, his phone calls, his sudden disappearances. Her unease grew into fear, and yet she couldn't turn away. The knowledge of his secret bound her to him in a dangerous way. At times she considered confronting him, but something deep inside warned her against it. She remembered the cold flash in his eyes whenever she asked too many questions. If he realized what she knew, she feared the consequence. She turned to her closest friend, Marissa Quaid, unable to keep the burden to herself any longer. In cautious fragments, she confessed that something wasn't right with Ethan. She spoke vaguely of hidden papers, of secrets that made her question her safety. Marissa urged her to be careful, and though Nadira didn't reveal the full scope of what she had discovered, she felt a small sense of relief in sharing her fear. Yet even that act carried risk. If Ethan suspected she had spoken to anyone, his reaction could be unpredictable. What Nadira did not realize was that Ethan had already noticed her unease. He saw the way she lingered in his study longer than usual, how she asked questions in roundabout ways, and how her eyes no longer lit up when he entered the room. Ethan's instincts told him she was close to uncovering something, and for a man who had built his life on lies, that made her a liability. He began to watch her as closely as she watched him, calculating his next move with chilling precision. The fragile balance of their marriage was gone. Nadira's discovery had set into motion a chain of events she could no longer control. She had crossed a line, and Ethan knew it. The truth she stumbled upon was powerful enough to expose him, and he would not allow that to happen. What she thought was simply a hidden past was far more dangerous than she ever imagined, and her curiosity had placed her directly in the path of the darkness Ethan had spent years trying to conceal. Ethan Rowden had always been skilled at hiding his emotions, but on the night Nadira vanished, there was a sharp edge to his calmness, a precision in his actions that hinted at careful planning. For days leading up to it, he had worked to maintain the illusion of normalcy. He shared meals with Nadira, pretended to read on the couch, even asked about her day in the same warm tone he used to disarm strangers. Yet behind the mask, he was preparing for what he knew must be done. Nadira had ventured too close to the truth, and for Ethan there was no turning back. The night itself unfolded with chilling simplicity. After dinner, Nadira moved through the house quietly, unaware that she was walking into the trap her husband had set. To the outside world it would appear as though she had simply disappeared, but Ethan's every movement was calculated. Hours later, the home stood in silence. Nadira's phone lay on the bedside table, untouched, as if she had stepped out only for a moment. Her purse, still filled with her identification and credit cards, rested by the door. Nothing about the scene suggested a woman preparing to leave her life behind. To anyone looking closely, it was a staged performance, a carefully crafted illusion designed to mislead. When Nadira's absence stretched into the following day, whispers began. Neighbors noticed the stillness around the Rowden home, the curtains drawn, the car parked in its usual place. Friends who couldn't reach her by phone grew uneasy, and soon her disappearance became official. The police were called, and the case was assigned to Detective Clara Mendez, a woman known for her tenacity and sharp instincts. From the beginning, she sensed the inconsistencies. Husbands were often the first suspects in missing person cases, but Ethan's composure immediately drew her attention. He answered questions smoothly, his voice steady, his body language carefully rehearsed. Yet there was something hollow about his words, as though he was following a script rather than speaking from genuine concern. Clara walked through the Rowden home, her eyes tracing every detail. She noticed the faint scent of cleaning chemicals lingering in the garage, stronger than in other parts of the house. In the master bedroom, the bed sheets were neatly arranged, but the mattress beneath bore subtle indentations that suggested something heavier than sleep had taken place. On the living room floor, tiny scuffs in the wood hinted at furniture being shifted slightly, perhaps to conceal marks of a struggle. These were small signs, almost invisible to an untrained eye, but they whispered of violence hidden beneath an orderly surface. Ethan insisted that Nadira had been distant in recent weeks, claiming she had spoken of missing Malaysia and her family. He implied that she might have chosen to leave, to return home without telling him. To some, it might have sounded plausible, but Clara wasn't convinced. A woman does not abandon her belongings so neatly, and certainly not her phone, the tether to her daily life. The very details Ethan offered to defend himself only raised further suspicion. Days stretched into weeks, and the search for Nadira expanded beyond the neighborhood. Flyers appeared on lampposts and in grocery stores, her smiling face haunting those who saw it. Volunteers combed wooded areas, and local news stations carried the story of the Malaysian woman who had mysteriously disappeared from her suburban home. Each broadcast painted the couple as once perfect, now fractured by an unexplained tragedy. Behind the headlines, Ethan continued to maintain his facade, showing up for questioning in pressed suits, his expression perfectly controlled, though his eyes revealed nothing. For Clara Mendez, the case began to take on a darker urgency. She knew instinctively that Nadira had not vanished, of her own free will. Too many threads pointed back to the man who claimed to love her. The faint blood traces discovered beneath the layers of cleaner in the garage, the timeline discrepancies in Ethan's alibi, and his unusual calm all told the same story. Nadira's disappearance was no accident, and Ethan's carefully polished life was beginning to unravel under the weight of the investigation. Though no body had yet been found, Clara felt the truth closing in.
What lay beneath Ethan's charm was something colder, something dangerous, and Nadira's sudden absence was only the surface of a crime far more sinister than anyone had yet realized. The house that once looked like the perfect home was now a crime scene in disguise, and the man at its center was standing on the edge of exposure. Nadira's fate remained hidden in shadows, but every clue suggested that Ethan had orchestrated a night that would forever erase the illusion of their perfect marriage. As the investigation into Nadira's disappearance dragged on, the cracks in Ethan Rowden's carefully constructed life began to widen. For weeks he had managed to hold his composure, maintaining the image of a calm and grieving husband, but the evidence gathered by Detective Clara Mendez was steadily pointing in one direction. While Ethan appeared to the public as a man caught in unfortunate circumstances, privately, Clara saw the pattern of a predator trying to stay one step ahead of the truth. Every piece of information she uncovered suggested that Nadira had not simply vanished, but had been silenced for uncovering a life Ethan had spent years trying to bury. The turning point came when Grant Willard entered the picture. Grant, a man with a history as murky as Ethan's, had once been his associate in questionable overseas business dealings. He had no reason to protect Ethan, and when investigators pressed him about old financial ties, his name surfaced alongside Ethan's in several fraudulent schemes. Grant's statement added a chilling layer to the case. Years earlier, a woman had gone missing under similar circumstances after threatening to expose Ethan's operations. Though the case had gone cold, the resemblance was undeniable. Clara recognized that Nadira's fate might have followed the same tragic path. Digging deeper, investigators pieced together a timeline of Ethan's movements around the night Nadira vanished. Surveillance cameras from a distant highway captured his car, traveling toward a remote woodland area at odd hours, long after he claimed to have been at home. The footage was grainy, but the make and license plate of the vehicle matched perfectly. Coupled with the faint blood traces discovered in the garage, the case against Ethan grew stronger. His calm explanations began to sound rehearsed, every word carefully chosen to deflect suspicion, but the walls were closing in. Clara was relentless. She revisited the Rowden home multiple times, searching for anything that could confirm her theory. One detail stood out on her latest visit: the pattern of cleaning in the garage. Ethan had scrubbed obsessively, yet certain crevices still held traces of blood identified as Nadira's. Through DNA testing, the evidence suggested that the garage had been the site of violence, a place where Ethan's mask of control had briefly slipped, revealing the brutality beneath. Ethan's past, once a vague suspicion, now came into sharper focus. Financial records linked him to offshore accounts used for laundering money, and his association with dangerous figures overseas painted a picture of a man deeply entrenched in criminal activity. Nadira's discovery of these documents had not only threatened to expose his financial dealings, but also risked unraveling years of carefully hidden crimes. For Ethan, the risk of exposure outweighed everything else, even his wife's life. As the investigation gained momentum, Clara confronted the inconsistencies in Ethan's alibi. He claimed he had been at home during the hours Nadira went missing, yet his phone records placed him miles away, pinging off towers near the woodland area captured on the surveillance tape. His lies, once smooth and convincing, began to fray under scrutiny. Still, Ethan never lost his calm demeanor. In interviews he sat with perfect posture, answering questions with precision, as if he believed his charm and composure would be enough to protect him. To those who didn't know the evidence, he might have seemed believable, but Clara saw through him. Behind the scenes, the case drew more public attention. Local news outlets reported every update, portraying Nadira as a devoted wife whose life had ended in mystery. Her friends spoke of her kindness, her generosity, and the quiet worries she had shared about Ethan's secrecy. Marissa Quaid revealed that Nadira had hinted at being afraid in the weeks before she disappeared, a detail that further tightened the noose around Ethan. Piece by piece the puzzle was falling into place. The story of a perfect husband was crumbling, replaced by the truth of a man who lived in shadows, willing to destroy anyone who threatened to reveal him. Clara knew the case was moving toward a critical moment. She had the surveillance footage, the financial links, the DNA evidence, and the testimony of those who had seen Nadira's growing fear. What she needed now was the final proof, something that would tie Ethan directly to Nadira's fate, and eliminate the last doubt in court. The investigation no longer centered on whether Ethan was guilty, but on finding the evidence that would make his conviction undeniable. Nadira's absence had turned into a haunting presence in every corner of Ethan's life, and with every day that passed, the chances of his carefully hidden past remaining secret grew slimmer. Ethan believed he could outlast the storm, but Clara was determined to show that even the most polished facade could not withstand the weight of truth. The past he had tried to bury was clawing its way back, and soon it would expose everything he had fought to protect. Weeks of tireless searching finally came to a tragic end when a hiker stumbled upon a shallow grave in a remote woodland area miles from the Rowden home. The body, though partially decomposed, was quickly identified as Nadira Halim through dental records and personal belongings buried alongside her. The discovery sent shockwaves through the quiet community that had once viewed Nadira and Ethan as the picture of marital bliss. The idyllic storybook image of the Rowdens collapsed instantly, replaced by the grim reality of betrayal, violence and calculated deceit. For Detective Clara Mendez, the grave provided the final piece of evidence she needed to close the case against Ethan Rowden. The site itself told a story. The disturbed soil was shallow and uneven, suggesting haste, while the clothing Nadira wore still bore the signs of a struggle. Forensic teams worked methodically, uncovering fibers that matched the carpet in the Rowden home, and traces of chemicals similar to those found in the garage, where Ethan had attempted to scrub away the evidence. The puzzle pieces fit too neatly to be ignored. Every effort Ethan had made to erase his crime was unraveling, leaving behind a trail of proof too damning to explain away. Ethan was arrested at dawn 2 days later. Neighbors watched in stunned silence as the once respected man was led out of his home in handcuffs, his face still wearing the mask of composure he had perfected over the years. Yet even then there was an eerie calm about him, as though he believed he could still control the narrative. In police custody, he maintained his innocence, insisting Nadira had left on her own, and that the discovery of her body was nothing more than a tragic coincidence. But the evidence told another story, one of cold calculation, and the ruthless silencing of a woman who had uncovered too much. The trial that followed drew national attention. Headlines across the country painted Ethan Rowden as the charming husband-turned-killer, a man whose double life had finally caught up with him. Prosecutors laid out the evidence in painstaking detail: the offshore accounts Nadira had discovered, the incriminating photographs in his possession, the blood traces in the garage, the surveillance footage of his car on the highway, and finally the shallow grave where Nadira's life had ended. Witnesses testified to Nadira's growing fear in the weeks before her disappearance, with Marissa Quaid recalling how Nadira had hinted she felt unsafe at home. Grant Willard's testimony added weight to the claim that Ethan had a history of silencing those who threatened to expose him. Through it all, Ethan never lost his practiced composure. He sat in the courtroom with an expression of calm detachment, as though the proceedings were happening to someone else. His defense tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, that his financial dealings, though questionable, did not connect him directly to Nadira's death. They tried to paint Nadira as a woman unhappy in her marriage, perhaps looking for an escape, but the jury saw through the facade. The trail of evidence was too detailed, too specific, and too damning to dismiss. When the verdict was read, declaring Ethan Rowden guilty of murder, the calm mask he had worn for so long finally cracked. For the first time, the controlled man who had built his life on lies revealed a flash of anger and disbelief. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, his freedom stripped away as the shadows of his crimes caught up to him. For Nadira's family, the verdict brought only partial closure. Her life had been stolen too soon, her future cut short by the very man who had vowed to protect her. Yet her courage in uncovering Ethan's secrets ensured that he could no longer hurt anyone else. Detective Clara Mendez later reflected that Nadira's determination to seek the truth, even quietly, had been the key to unraveling a case that might otherwise have remained buried. The story of Ethan and Nadira became a cautionary tale. It reminded people that appearances can be deceiving, that even the most polished lives can conceal unimaginable darkness. Behind the walls of a suburban home, a woman's instincts had warned her of danger, and though her life ended in tragedy, her story exposed the truth. In the end, justice came not from Ethan's silence, but from Nadira's refusal to ignore the secrets that lay hidden in the shadows of her marriage. Her name lived on as a symbol of resilience, while Ethan Rowden's legacy was forever defined by betrayal, greed and the brutal murder that stripped away his carefully constructed illusion of perfection.